faculty, staff, friends of the College of Commerce that have showed up today. It's a very exciting event for us. It's the kickoff to the Gord and Maureen Haddock series in entrepreneurship. We're very excited about that. And welcome Brett Wilson to the college along with his companions. We're thrilled to have them. I get the pleasure of introducing Gord and Maureen, and then they will introduce Brett. Before we get to that, we just have to start with Gord and Maureen. They're tremendous friends of the College of Commerce and have been. The first time I met Gord, he said to me, "You're the third dean now I've tried to get to do entrepreneurship in this college." So hopefully we're finally meeting his agenda here. We're kickstarting this. We've got entrepreneurship programming with engineering now, hopefully with arts and science. The next step is perhaps a major within the College of Commerce. So we're pretty excited about this. And this series is just really for us, it's the beginning. I'd like to tell you a bit about Gord and Maureen. Basically, they are entrepreneurs. There is just no other way to define these two people. Entrepreneurial spirit has led them to develop many businesses, and it's quite a list, just bear with me. Advertising agency, music stores, drug stores, card and gift stores, businesses involving land development, fast food, clothing, tourism, businesses that started from scratch, businesses that were part of franchises. It really is a Saskatoon success. It's a success story anywhere, but it's a Saskatoon success story. Gord is a graduate of the College of Commerce, and Maureen is a graduate of the College of Education. Now, I won't take any swipes of that, because so is my wife, so I could be in trouble if I did that. And they have two daughters, and two sons-in-laws, two wonderful sons-in-laws, and two little grandsons. So please join me in welcoming Gord and Maureen.
September 1971, Frosh Week. The time, 11:30 a.m. The place, the pub in the Cavalier Hotel. The music, Proud Mary by CCR is on the jukebox. The why, get there early to get a good seat near the shuffleboard table. The opportunity, young engineering students are overheard in the washroom saying that they're having trouble getting the tank going for Frosh Week. The plan, steal the tank, fix it, repaint it with appropriate sayings to embarrass the College of Engineering. The supplies, 48 beer, 1 tow rope, 1 tow vehicle. The crew, most short in mechanical ability, but long in enthusiasm. The ace in the hole. 2 of the team grew up on the farm and can fix anything. The heist, 12:10 a.m. Tank is stolen, secured in a garage by a house near the university. The result, 10 a.m. the following morning, 48 beer consumed, truck repaired and painted despite the condition of the crew. The insult, at 12:01, tank and crew began noisy and slow drive around the bowl, with crew hanging out of the tank reciting rude, rhyming slogans about the engineers. The effect, huge crowds of students watched the new Commerce tank in awe and wonder. The inspiration, cheered on by an adoring crowd, the success of the first trip around the bowl, and the numerous refreshments consumed earlier, the crew dares to make a second lap. The result, the hornet's nest had been kicked. Hundreds of red-coated engineers swarmed out between the buildings at the east end of the bowl, running toward the tank and its crew. The meeting, a board meeting of the tank crew, was held. All the options were carefully considered within 5 seconds, and it was unanimously agreed that we should abandon ship and retreat to the second floor Commerce Lounge to discuss our success. Now, I think all of you will agree that this little story, which is true, I have the book here with the photos for the engineers who would find that hard to believe. I think all of you would agree that this little story illustrates a couple of things. One, the entrepreneurism of the College of Commerce tank group. They saw an opportunity, they set a goal, they made a plan, they completed the plan, and they celebrated their success. I think you would also agree that it shows the organizational skills of the College of Engineering to be able to mass between 200 and 300 engineers in 4 to 5 minutes during their time of humiliation. Now, occasionally, a person such as our guest speaker, Brett Wilson, crosses over from the organizational side of the campus over to the entrepreneurial side. Now, Brett was born in North Battleford and earned his BSc in, you got it, civil engineering at the U of S in 1979. He joined MEO Resources and spent time in oil patches from southern Saskatchewan to the Beaufort Sea. In 1985, he completed his MBA at the University of Calgary and began his career as an investment banker in the oil and gas business with McCloud Weir. In 1993, Brett co-founded FirstEnergy Capital Corporation, which is now a dominant participant in all aspects of investment banking for the Canadian energy industry. I won't list them, but believe me, his business honors and awards fill a whole page, but he's also involved in a wide variety of corporate, cultural, and community organizations. He is a proud father of 3 children, and in the past 6 years, he's traveled with them to over 30 countries, including 6 trips to Mexico, where he and his children build homes for the homeless. Ladies and gentlemen, direct from Alberta, the province that Saskatchewan built, Mr. Brett Wilson.
The Gordon and Maureen Haddock. It could have been Gordon, Maureen, Michelle, Brett, and the sister with red hair, and I can't remember her name, series. I think it's admirable the effort that you've put into bringing us together, and I'm kind of delighted to be the first speaker chosen as an alma mater, as this is my alma mater. I did graduate engineering. The story that he told troubled me greatly. I was once the president of the College of Engineering. I was involved with the Red Eye. I was involved with resurrecting, bringing Lady Godiva back to campus. We even had a white horse, and that was the hard part. We had a lot of fun as students on campus. There's no question. This series is about entrepreneurship. Some of you saw me speak at noon today with Junior Achievement. A few others were in the classroom a few minutes ago as we were talking about FirstEnergy and the business that I've run. When Grant Isaac asked me to participate in this program, I asked if there would be any overlap between the 3 sets of speeches or talks, and fearing that I would end up having to prepare 3 totally different talks. And he said, yes, you will, because there will be overlap. So I assure you there is considerable uniqueness to each of the opportunities that I've had in terms of speaking with you. Entrepreneurship is something I actually studied when I went on to do my MBA, and I've always been fascinated by it. But let me go back sort of to the roots. I'll talk a little bit about early experiences in entrepreneurship, experiences that I probably didn't even realize were entrepreneurial in nature. I'm going to talk about my education in terms of where I went to school and what some of the university-driven learnings were in terms of entrepreneurship. We'll talk about the big picture, where I worked for big corporate Canada, and what I learned or didn't learn in each of those circumstances, the number of entrepreneurial investments that I've made over the years, and I also call them adventures. Some of them were winners, some of them were losers. And then lastly, I'll spend a little bit of time on what I think were some of the lessons that I've learned. And there will be some overlap with earlier talks, as you'll hear the words passion, you'll hear the words marketing, you'll hear the words focus and process. So some of my early entrepreneurial experiences were relatively unsuccessful. I remember spending an entire summer mowing the lawn for the lady next door. Going rate for lawn cutting was a couple bucks a crack, times 20, you should make about 40 bucks. I went over to collect at the end of the summer. She handed me, I think it was $10, and a bottle of pop. And I realized at that time I hadn't done a very good job of setting expectations for either of us. Either I was way out to lunch or I just plain forgot to tell her what it cost. And as it all turned out, Dad paid for the gas and the lawnmower, so he was out $40 in terms of wear and tear. And none of us came out very far ahead. But it was an interesting experience nonetheless. I also had the opportunity to understand what piecework meant, working on commission. When I went out and worked with I wish I could remember their names. They ended up coming to campus. But I spent time in the Mayfair district working on farms, hauling bales on the weekend, and we got paid by the bale. So instead of my gas jock job, which was $1.85 an hour, we got paid by the bale. And that gave us incentive to get up at 5 in the morning, have the biggest breakfast possible, to work right through lunch and haul right until it was dark, when we then went in and crashed whatever wedding was going on in Mayfair, because everybody went to the weddings. And that was also free supper and for the most part free booze. So it was a great opportunity to, and the other thing is, by the end of the first time I was ever out, I couldn't move my hands from this shape. They were just locked. I couldn't believe the pain and agony I was in on day one after hauling bales. But again, 3 cents, 5 cents, whatever it was a bale for moving bales was a phenomenal incentive, and I began to appreciate then what, I call it piecework or working on commission, could mean. Investment clubs, I got involved with 2 of them. The first one we called ENCOSA, Engineers Commerce Saskatchewan. There was about 10 of us got together at the university in the residence, and each put up $200. And one of the commerce accounting majors did the accounting, and there was half a dozen of us obviously from engineering, 4 or 5 from engineering, and there was another half a dozen from commerce. And that was, we all put up the couple $100. We came out of it with about 220, but it was our first experience at understanding how to trade the market. And as engineers, we were fascinated, and likewise the commerce guys were equally interested in what the engineers had for contacts, thanks to our summer jobs and knowledge of some of what was going on in terms of opportunities. I ran a second investment club when I joined MEO Resources, and immediately had a bunch of guys playing put and call options on the oil patch, and we'd taken a group of 6 or 7 of us had taken about $1,000 and turned it into $7,000 or $8,000 in the course of 3 or 4 months. And then the National Energy Plan was announced, and 8,000 went to 0 that day. These out-of-the-money call options, which had tripled, went to 0. Great lesson with what turns out in hindsight to be not that much money, but it was a great opportunity to make a mistake. Got a little full of ourselves. The fun one was B&D Enterprises, named by my partner Daryl, and it was of course Brett and Daryl Enterprises. And we were both in the executive of the student residence called Voyager Place at the time, still same thing. And the residents refused to get involved with what we wanted to do, which was organize a bus to take us from the residence down to, not the Jubilee, Centennial, whatever it's called, Teachers something now. But the big parties that were in the basement of that were the place to be. And we wanted to transport everybody from res down there. And so what Daryl and I did was we booked a city bus, and we had 2 of them actually, because I think it was $30 for a round trip, so it was cost us $60. We charged everybody $1 a head to get on the bus at 7 o'clock when we went down. One bus came back at midnight, one came back at 1, and both of those buses were virtually empty because everyone had gotten hammered up and paired up and gone. Didn't much matter, but we were making, and again, keep in mind, minimum wage at that time would have been $1.75, $2, somewhere in there, and Daryl and I were making $50, $75 a night running these buses. And after we'd run 4 or 5, that point the residents said, well, we should be doing this. We said, well, we asked you to and you wouldn't. So that business was expropriated in typical Saskatchewan fashion. I was also on campus at the time that Buck Staples was leading the charge against those who decided that it was in the interests of Saskatchewan to protect the outside world from those who were exploiting potash. So they nationalized potash, a key critical element of everything we do in this world, and they nationalized it. Never made a lot of sense to me then, still doesn't now. Of course, they then reversed policy, took it public, and have turned Potash Corp into one of the great corporations in North America, not just Saskatchewan. But that was one of my first experiences in watching business. And the only reason I really paid any attention to that is I'd worked for Central Canada Potash in the Colonze mine working as a welder's helper, which is as low on the food chain as you can possibly get in a potash mine. But it was a great summer experience. So that's early experiences. The 2 things that I had in terms of university education, I did my MBA at the University of Calgary, but I did my undergrad here. Got very involved in student politics. I think I had 7 elected positions in my last 2 years on campus, including being an MAL, member at large, representing the College of Engineering, which is where I met several people that I've since done a fair bit of business with. Murray Edwards was an MAL for the College of Commerce at the time. And within 2 or 3 weeks, we hadn't known each other at all, but we ended up sitting in the same corner when the Student Association, what was the USSU was meeting, might still be named that, and we were meeting, and we ended up sitting in the corner together, and all was whispering, catching hell from the whoever was running the meetings. But I remember there were sort of 2 purposes of student politicians at the time. One was to organize the photocopiers, because that was a business at the time, and the other was to keep the communists from invading the student society. And on the photocopiers, we didn't pay much attention, but Maureen and I were pretty focused whenever I've forgotten what the communist group was that was active on Catherine Dow-Schmidt was running it, but we had to fight them off. So that was a big part of what sort of gelled Murray and I in getting to know each other. I also ran for Senate the first year that they allowed students to be elected to the Senate, and it was through that I got to know a guy named Mike Maher, which was a pivotal opportunity in my life, which I'll come back to. Student politics, I can't underestimate what I learned there in terms of entrepreneurial opportunities. Driven in no small part by the fact that the year I was elected president, there was, I think, 7 of us. And by the time we had finished exams, 7 was down to 3. 4 of them had flunked out. So the executive had shrunk dramatically. But what that did was it gave me an opportunity as the president of the Student Society to go back and do a cherry pick. I went to the people who had run against me in terms of running for president, and a couple people who had run unsuccessfully for some of the other positions. But I was able to cherry pick and run an election the first week before anyone was here. Boom, we had an executive and we were up and running. The other thing, that although I was the president, I didn't have an opportunity to have a VP social organize anything. So I had to take on social. And the very first dance that we did of the year was called the Hell Dance. And it was up in Marquis Hall, Marquis Shakes as we used to call them. And I booked a band called One Horse Blue at the beginning of the summer, and I remember it cost me $800. Over the summer, One Horse Blue had their only hit. And so by the time we went to sell tickets, instead of the usual $4 or $5 a ticket, we charged 10, which offended everybody, but we sold it out in less than a day. So again, another interesting entrepreneurial opportunity. Price of beer went up under my tutelage. We ended up, there was a whole bunch of things, partly because there was so much leakage. You know, when we started doing the analysis on how much was sold versus how much was given away to their friends, I mean, we had to charge more in order to cover the cost of the leakage. But so we brought a business perspective to how we ran the Student Society, and I think that's continued since then. I had a lot of fun doing that. There's lots of stories. MEO Resources. Went to work for them in 1979, spent 3.5 years there. I've told this story several times, but I did their management evaluation tool where I wrote, it was psychological profiling, and I failed. There was no hope of me ever becoming management at MEO. And in hindsight, there was no hope. I don't know why I wanted to be a manager at a place like that. The way they approach business, the way they approach decisions is a big company's mindset. Very myopic, very bureaucratic, very lethargic, and unless run up a chain of command, absolutely no interest in making some more entrepreneurial opportunities happen. So it actually turned me off of business when I saw how difficult it was to make things happen inside that environment. But it also encouraged me to look at smaller opportunities on the day that I might graduate. I went back to the University of Calgary. I shared this with some of the business students a little while ago, but I went there and asked for, went up to the MBA Society or the MBA office and asked for an application form, and they wouldn't even give me the application form after asking me a little bit about, you know, have I written the GMAT? Nope, but I'm going to. Have you a grade point average greater than or a percentage greater than? Nope. And they said, well, have you got 5 years work experience? I said, no, I'm at 3. So I'd struck out on all 3 counts, and so they wouldn't even give me the application form. And given that I had passed, or failed, if you will, the MEO Resources, I'd passed in my mind working for them as a career, I had no choice but to go back to school. My wife was working as an engineer in Calgary, so I also had no choice but to go to school at the University of Calgary. And these guys won't even give me their application form, so I'm a little bit hooped. Went downstairs and had 2 quarters in my pocket, I remember, grabbed and again, 1975, there's no cell phones, went to the payphone that was down in the lobby and called up and looked for a guy named Mike Maher. And Mike, for those of you in the business school, was a legendary predecessor to Grant, probably going back 2 or 3. But Mike had done a phenomenal job of building the business community's interest in the School of Business, or the College of Commerce as it's called here. And Mike had moved to Calgary to take over that program. And so I called him after a little bit of experience on the Senate. And by the way, that experience was that the VP academic, whose name I've long since forgotten, stood up in front of the Senate in the very first meeting that I was at and talked about the integration of foreign students and how successful that was at the University of Saskatchewan. And he gave this long talk, everyone pounded the table, and then there were sort of the perfunctories, anybody having questions? I said, well, yeah, this foreign student integration thing isn't working so well. And the room went silent, just dead silent. And the point I made was that in the in the Faculty of Engineering, more than half the college was foreign students. And there was no issue with that. The issue was that we weren't funded. They weren't able to process labs, they didn't have enough teachers, didn't have large enough rooms. And the overall goal of the university was to have, I think it was 10 or 12% foreign student enrollment. Well, we were at 50% in the College of Engineering. And again, not complaining about that, complaining about the fact that they hadn't let resources follow the concentration of foreign students in our program. Well, the chief called me a bigot. I had to appear in front of the Chinese Student Society. Fortunately, very active and very close to a number of people who were active in that program. So that all got worked through once they understood what had been said and what was meant. But it was Mike Maher was the only faculty rep who stood up and said, just a minute, let's hear this out and understand what the real issue is. And so I developed a rapport with Mike at that time. Got a hold of Mike, and Mike said, sure, I'll let you into the program. And I'm thinking, this sounds too easy now because I haven't even been able to get an application for him, and you're telling me I can get in. He says, okay, but there's 3 conditions. One is you've got to get a minimum GMAT, which for those of you who don't know it, there's an entrance exam that you write all over the world at the very same time, and it's just an aptitude test of some sort. So you've got to have a minimum GMAT of some number. You've got to have a minimum of a grade point average of an A- or an A or something that was reasonably lofty relative to where I had been. And I had to stay out of student politics. Those were the 3 conditions that I was allowed into the University of Calgary on. Went and did the GMAT. Hope it was out of 500. I forget now. Got the marks that he asked for, and then I went back to him and asked for permission for dispensation from the issue in student politics, and I got very involved there once again in terms of stirring the pot and trying to bring a sense of team and a camaraderie through the student side to the environment that the University of Calgary. And that time, I was doing an MBA that was run part-time. It was only at night. They only had classes frankly, every night of the week. So my wife, I'd drive her to work in the morning, she'd come home, we'd have supper, boom, I'm gone, and that would be sort of the overlap at breakfast and supper because of the program. But great opportunity. I did study entrepreneurship. Now, I wasn't the first to graduate with qualifying for an MBA in entrepreneurship. I was the first to accept an MBA in entrepreneurship. The 4 or 5 before me were afraid of how that would taint their market, or taint their market value, taint their resumes at that time. They were afraid that the corporate world would look at them and go, well, these guys just want to run a gas station or a laundromat and have no interest in working in big business. So I took a little bit of liberty with my resume, and if you ever see a copy from 1985, it kind of looks like I've got a co-specialization in finance and entrepreneurship, so I had to build on that a little bit. But my MBA is truly labeled, and I was the first graduate from the University of Calgary to take the designation entrepreneurship. Number of learnings in entrepreneurship that for me were fascinating. We did a number of case studies. One of the first classes I took when I was in my probationary period was a class that did nothing but study entrepreneurial case opportunities or cases in entrepreneurial opportunities. And for me that was fascinating, seeing how small businesses could be turned into large businesses, not just taking small businesses and staying as a small business. So a great learning curve for me. The other thing that I found fascinating was understanding, and people still want to debate this at length, and I don't care, I'm right, you're wrong, on the issue of entrepreneurs are not risk takers. Entrepreneurs view risk differently. So it's not about the adrenaline rush of rolling the dice to see if your business can get off the ground. It's about having the confidence in the analysis and decision making that you've done to tell you that the risks you're taking are reasonable. So again, it's not about taking risk, it's about evaluating risk. And often the entrepreneurial mindset will be more aggressive at accepting. They will have a higher tolerance, a higher threshold for risk. I mean, and in my case today, I could be involved with starting 10 more businesses in the next 6 months with no fear for the fact that 1 or 2 might fail. That's okay. Failure is a learning opportunity. And I've had many of those. Big picture entrepreneurship. I've used the word entrepreneurship at the request, although indirectly, because I didn't think there was enough room at the top. See, I called it the Haddock Lecture. Otherwise, it would have been the Gord and Maureen Haddock Lecture series. You know, I didn't have room for me or my title. So we stuck entrepreneurship on every page. So big picture entrepreneurship. I ended up at McCloud Young Weir. When I joined them, they were maybe 50 salesmen, probably 300 people in total. By the time they were sold to the Bank of Nova Scotia in 1988, they were up around 1,000 people. I often tell the story of having left McCloud Young Weir and them announcing my 5th anniversary in their internal newsletter 3 months after I quit. You really know you're missed when the HR department doesn't pick up on the fact that you're gone. The issue there was that they had gotten large, they'd gotten bureaucratic, and they didn't represent the focus on energy that I thought Calgary should have, that an investment bank with an office in Calgary, they wanted to be geographic in their account coverage, so it meant we covered the West Edmonton Mall, we covered Pacific Western Airlines, Canadian Pacific Airlines, we covered LSI Logic, which made application-specific chips. We covered anything and everything that was resident in Calgary. And I continually argued that the only way we can differentiate ourselves against our competitors is to understand our client's business properly. Instead of walking in and saying we're capital markets experts, why don't we go in and say, tell us a bit about your business, but make sure as they're telling us that they understand that we know exactly where they are and where they've been and where they're going. In other words, today FirstEnergy could run an entire oil company with the talent and skills we have built in terms of technical skills. So I wanted to position it that way. Ended up going to a small shop called Watrous Securities. There was a gap between the ethics of the individual running that shop and me. The gap was large. He had none. I thought I had some. And I was very, very frustrated while I was there. But it was a small shop. They were focused entirely on energy. They were brokering oil and gas properties. And I thought the business plan had promise. But it also told me a lot about judging. My gut had said, you got to be careful if you make a decision to go with this shop. You got to be careful. Everyone warned me that it's not the right thing to do. But I had pig-headedly decided that I didn't want to be at a big bank like McCloud anymore. I wanted to be an energy specialist. Took 18 months for me to get the gumption. And the gumption was the small push that I received by traveling with a client who had asked me about how Watrous was doing in terms of their vision of going from being just a property broker to a full-service investment bank. And the fact that it took me a minute or so to start the answer, I think gave the client some sense of discomfort on my part. That, and he point blank said, like, does he have Watrous and the group that's assembled, do they have what it takes to become a full service investment bank? And I kind of politely shrugged, knowing that this was our main client. I can't be sassing my own boss because I've still got my fortunes tied to this shop. So I was very careful about that. And the guy came back with a comment along the lines of, if you ever go out on your own, I would hire you. On the strength of that snippet, I went ahead and started the planning to go out on my own and built a business called Wilson Mackey, imaginatively named after me and a guy named Mackey. Our business was brokering oil and gas properties. That's all we did. Small companies, but basically focused on brokering oil and gas properties. Oil and gas properties brokered just the way a realtor would broker a commercial property. So we were dealing with properties worth $5 million, $100 million. Serious business, but a business that the investment banks had left alone. They literally thumbed their noses at it, calling it the low end of the business because you were just brokering properties. That's okay. First year we did about $100 million worth of business. The second year over $1 billion. And in the second year, my net bottom line to my own pocket was most months double what I'd ever made in a year. But it took a year of getting that platform built and up and running, obviously working on a commission basis. We did well. FirstEnergy, the genesis of FirstEnergy was a conversation that I'd had with Murray Edwards, another Saskatchewan alma mater, where I'd asked him to back Wilson Mackey. I had, my wife was working part-time. We just had our second child, and she was an engineer in Calgary, and we'd bought a bigger house than we should have, so we were kind of house rich and mortgage poor. And had no net capital to work with. So I approached Murray and said that I wanted to start this property brokerage business, and I was looking for $250,000. I thought $250,000 would be enough to carry the business with working capital, the salary of 2 or 3 employees. The partners would take nothing. And he came back and said that he had some concerns. One was that I was going to try and build it into a full-service brokerage firm and compete with Peters & Co., which is where he was residing part-time. He had a business relationship where he did merchant banking with one of our competitors, this Peters & Co. group. But he said he would do the $250,000 loan, but he wanted a 10% coupon. Prime was probably 8 at the time, so 10% wasn't offensive, but he also wanted half the business. And I responded with something like, you may as well ask for one of my kids. And I'm glad he didn't say yes, because I'm still pretty fond of that daughter. He and I continued our friendship, even though I outright rejected his offer. And I went back, and Pam and I put, my ex-wife and I put a second mortgage on our house for $25,000. Jamie came up with $25,000. And so we scrambled, and we used furniture. We took an office space that was lower in quality than any of our competitors would have dreamed. And we just, we managed month to month. Most months we had to write checks to cover payroll the first year. We just didn't have any working capital, but we didn't overcapitalize at the time. So it was a scramble. But by the second half of the first year, we'd started to generate sales. And as I say, in the second year, literally knocked the lights out. We did over $1 billion worth of property transactions. So through all of this, Edwards has a falling out with Peters & Co. and approaches me and says, all right, do you want to turn Wilson Mackey into a full-service investment bank? And I'm going, well, yeah, I do, but we've got $1 billion worth of deals underway. We're renovating a house that I shouldn't have gotten into, and second child just showed, it's not the right time. And he pushed and pushed and pushed, and finally I agreed to meet with him about 2 months later. And after that, we started meeting every second week, and we met on Tuesday nights downtown, and over the course of the next several months started to build a business plan. We called it the Agenda, and started to write out what we thought the opportunity was to build an investment bank from scratch. Keep in mind, this was the first investment bank to be launched on the national scene in probably over a decade, maybe 2 decades, where we were intending to be a national presence, serious competitors for anybody that was going to play in our backyard being energy. We managed to attract 2 other partners, Rick Grafton, Jim Davidson, and I've told this story several times, but in essence, all 4 partners came out of Saskatchewan. I'm from North Battleford, Grafton came out of Moose Jaw, Edwards out of Regina, and Jim Davidson's mother is from Wilkie, and so we give him credit for possibly being conceived in Wilkie, although not born till he hit Toronto, but close enough that we give him Saskatchewan roots. The only frustration is he still cheers for the Toronto Maple Leafs, but a little misguided, but we can accept everybody has shortcomings. So FirstEnergy launched on the national scene in September of '93. We launched at a time when the market had just turned over. If you look at a stock chart, go back to the 90s, the oil and gas sub-index peaked the week we started and then began a 2-year decline, a straight line decline that we had to try and build our business into, which, not unlike my first year of Wilson Mackey, just made us tougher. Didn't kill us, just made us tougher. A lot of entrepreneurial experiences in that, ranging from developing processes, developing a vision around community. I've shared this story a couple times today, but we were proactive in setting up our business plan around charity being our marketing budget. We took 2.5% of our pre-tax profits on the agenda would be our commitment to charity. And that didn't include tables and marketing events and other things we would do, but 2.5% would be raw charity. Having said that, we would also be more proactive at extracting the right profile for our firm when we made a charitable donation. And by example, we would, and this still happens today, any check we write, if it goes to any given charity, we make sure that we check the current board of directors and copy anybody on that board with a copy of the letter and a copy of the check, because you're never going to offend someone with a copy of a check, as long as there's a check. And we make sure a copy goes to anybody who is a client of the firm's, a potential client of the firm's, a community leader that we want to know about us, and probably a competitor. We like rubbing it in a little bit that we're there. And we also try to react sort of within 24 hours of a charitable request so that it's back out. And that's the highest impact value you're going to see from a marketing dollar, is from a charitable dollar, is the marketing impact of being the first donation into any campaign. And I've got preset thresholds that I work with my partners on. I can match whatever we've done in the past. I can go up to some threshold. So it just happens. And in fact, now most charities, my secretary brings me the cover letter, a check request, the history, and the request, all in a package. And I can just, boom, it's done. And we today support somewhere in the order of 250 charities. We've supported well over 300 since we started. And again, we were a firm of 20 people when we started with this vision of using marketing to differentiate ourselves. Investment banks are not known for having a heart. And I've often joked about this as well, but my dad sold cars, my mom was a social worker. That's what allows me to be a capitalist with a heart. It's a combination that works. And we've carried that forward very effectively in terms of building the business. And differentiating. And the number of times I've had competitors take me aside and say, can you slow it down a little bit? I can't get Toronto to approve what you guys have just approved, and we only just met with you yesterday, or the charity in question just asked. So it's frustrated our competitors, it's delighted our clients, it's raised our profile, and right from the start, we've been proactive in using that opportunity for our benefit. Entrepreneurial Investments. I mentioned I was brokering oil and gas properties. If you're familiar with oil and gas properties at all, many of them are jointly held. I mean, the push over the last 15 years has been to go from fragmented ownership to consolidated ownership. Canadian Natural Resources, Renaissance, many of those became machines that went through the consolidation phase. But what happened when I was brokering properties, I would see the value. If a 12% interest in a $100 million property was worth $12 million, I could translate that to the 0.02% interest which was held. And this is all public record. You could determine who were owners in the property. It's okay, it's my dad. So what we started doing was taking the value, which had been predetermined by the market, and going and chasing some of the smaller pieces at a discount. And for the most part, the vendors would go, well, it's a small piece, we really don't care, we're just cleaning up. And so we started buying properties that we could almost 100% finance with bank financing. That's the kind of leverage I like. And it was an extraordinarily successful opportunity. I mentioned tax loss vehicles. We got involved with a whole bunch of different public and private opportunities. I'm still in Revenue Canada's disputes. I think there's a bullseye on my face and a couple of files at Revenue Canada. But we've never played with the law. We've simply aggressively applied the opportunities that, looking at the way the law works with these things. In one case, we bought a tax loss company and extracted more value out of the company in the first 6 months than we had paid by refiling tax returns for things that had been misfiled. It was more than we'd paid for the whole company. And of course, we then went on to use all the tax pools, and Revenue Canada called that a pure sham, that we hadn't complied with GAR, the General Anti-Avoidance Rules. Well, 14 years later, they still haven't proven that you haven't got a case. And it's obvious that they've given up on that one. The file's not closed. But that's just an example of the entrepreneurial application of tax law and being willing to stay the course. You know, there's opportunities abound. Oil patch startups, my partners and I have invested in well through 200, probably 250, maybe more, different oil and gas companies starting up over the last 15 years. What's happened is the life cycle of an oil and gas company has gone from almost forever. There was a day when you had the mindset of an oil and gas, an oil well and an oil man weren't parted till death. And then that started to change in the 90s when we started doing some of the consolidation and cleanup work in terms of the fractured interests. And now, frankly, some of the life cycles for an oil company can be less than a year. That's rare, but 2, 3, 4 years is not unusual. The exit strategy was until October 31, when the federal government changed the laws on income trusts that they promised us they wouldn't do. And by the way, if that was a public company who had made a statement that boldly, we will not do something, class action suits and jail time would have resulted for the CEO of the company. But because it's government, they've gotten away with that. So you probably have a sense of where I stand on that view. But little frustrating. I do, as one, appreciate what our federal Conservatives are doing in terms of being decisive. Something that the Liberals couldn't get their minds around because they kept floating with the wind. Martin was the worst, Chrétien was taking care of his friends, but they would float with the wind. The Conservatives, on the other hand, under Harper, are making decisions. I don't like all of their decisions, but I respect that they're making them because we can run a country when you know what the rules are. MEO Resources was the largest of the oil patch startups that, and again, these numbers are all public, but Murray Edwards and I took control of that with about $800,000 back in 1995. We did nothing with the company for 5 years except start to accumulate assets that nobody wanted. And I jokingly referred to it was a shitco. It just had stuff that nobody else wanted. But we built it up to a value when it was ultimately sold of just over $300 million. We had been diluted down and we owned less than about a quarter of the company at that time. But it was a very, very significant success, but not unique in the oil patch. That's a very common story for having built that sort of wealth over a period of time, working with the spin-off assets from the large oil and gas companies who frankly were so full of themselves that they stopped to take a close enough look at their own assets to understand what they actually owned. So that's some of the entrepreneurial investments. The adventures, which I'm stepping into right now. Bolt Supply House has an office here. We've got about 15 stores in Western Canada, and we sell industrial supplies. Started out, we were selling about $18 million worth of supplies a year. We're up through $40 million worth of mostly bolts. Opened a store in Fort McMurray. Cost structure in Fort McMurray is 3 times what it is in any other store, but the revenues are 10 times what we were expecting. So unbelievable opportunity there, and we're still looking to grow that business. I've been investing quite aggressively in developed real estate in Western Canada. A lot of opportunities for people wanting to cash out at what they think look like pretty healthy prices, and to us look like reasonable prices. And with a 20-year perspective, I think we'll do well. And then the other area, of course, is undeveloped real estate, and we're starting to exploit and develop that across Western Canada. The fun one that we've just added to the inventory of opportunities that we're pursuing has been the purchase of farmland in Saskatchewan. As some of you may recall, the NDP would not allow, the government of the day would not allow foreign ownership. And foreign ownership was defined as anybody from Alberta or anybody outside of Saskatchewan. We weren't allowed to own, as a foreigner, more than, I think it was a quarter section of land. Those rules changed 3 years ago, Grant, give or take? And as a result, we've stepped in and started buying farms from Weyburn to North Battleford. And in the most part, it's letting the vendors, who are the farmers, stay on the land. And, well, of course, we've let them stay on the land to the extent they want to, and just farm the land for us. So it's a very symbiotic relationship. The opportunity is driven in no small part by the fact that farmland has the same input costs and the same output revenues as Alberta, but the capital cost is sometimes as much as a third or only 1/3 of what we would pay for similar land in Alberta. Why? Because you had a fortress around the provincial borders that protected. For whose benefit? I don't know. Certainly not the farmers. They allowed the Hutterites to expand in whatever pace they wanted, in whatever direction they wanted, but they wouldn't let corporate farming because there was a perception that corporate farming was evil. But the reality is, in any ma and pa business, that consolidation is going to occur. That's the economic reality if they can't compete. And so sadly, many farmers who've departed the family farm over the last 10 years have suffered the fact that they lived in Saskatchewan all their lives, worked all their lives making a difference here, and got very little for it relative to what would have happened had there been a free market in land. So we're participating in that, and hopefully to everyone's benefit. And then the last investment I'll talk about is the Milner power plant. Widely auctioned power plant sold by the government of Alberta, who owned it at the time. And it was auctioned by an investment banker who had world contacts. There was 3 bids. The number 1 bid wasn't me. It was my partners and I were number 2, but number 1 choked, and we were given the chance to step into number 1's shoes, and we did. And the deal was basically $5 million cash and $15 million of future payments out of cash flow to fund reclamation or environmental liabilities. We bought it just as coal prices turned. The Milner power plant had lost its lost its coal supply contract, so it had no coal. And as a coal mine, or as a coal-fired power plant, you kind of need coal. So we tied up the plant for 60 days, ran around, managed to get a coal supply contract just before coal prices took off, also just before power prices took off. We were looking at $40, $45 a megawatt hour. At that time, today the market is around 70, it spikes to 100, but it's around $70, $75. And coal prices went from $40 a ton to $100 a ton. So the multiplicity of the confluence of opportunities there allowed us to take a $5 million investment and sell it to a public company a year later for a deemed value of just over $200 million. And that is still one of the most successful independent power producers in Western Canada. It's a public company, MXG is the symbol, and Chernoff and I each own about a quarter of that company, and we think we can probably get another double out of that yet. That's not a promise, that's just what we think. And, but again, that was a publicly auctioned opportunity, turned down by every major power producer in Canada because the quality of the asset sucked. It's a 35-year-old steel mill. Now we spend we paid $5 million. We spend between $5 and $10 million a year in maintenance capital keeping this thing alive. I mean, if you've ever seen rolls of duct tape, there's no place that orders more of them than the Milner power plant. But we're going to keep it alive. It's only got 12 years left in its economic life. We think we can keep it alive for another 25. So, the entrepreneurial lessons. And I list this as one, and there's 2 pages, and then I'll wrap and allow any questions. Number one, and we've already commented on this, is risk assessment. Entrepreneurs simply see risk differently. And I know some still get that buzz over taking a shot at seeing whether or not something will work, but there's still a perception in the mind of many people in the marketplace who see the word entrepreneur and identify it with small business, with a startup, and the word entrepreneurship came along, which is doing intrapreneurship, which is doing entrepreneurship inside a large corporation. I think the concept of intrapreneurship sucks. It's all entrepreneurial. You're using the same mindsets whether you're building a $6 billion oil sands plant or buying a $5 million scrap heap of metal that happens to produce power if you put enough coal into it. The same thing happens. So it's just viewing risk differently. Marketing skills, as I said to some of the business students earlier, I've given a talk several times entitled why a business degree in finance is practically useless. And my point there is really to say if you only study finance, you've missed probably the most important skill that I think you need to differentiate whatever you are, be it a doctor, a dentist, a lawyer, an accountant, a bookkeeper, or any trade, whatever. And that's marketing. And I don't care where you are on campus, find a way to get into one of Grant's marketing classes, because that's what's going to differentiate you against your competitors who forgot to study marketing. And I've often joked about taking the time to study psychology so you understand why marketing works. But if you don't have time, just study marketing. Most valuable class I ever took was called Consumer and Buyer Behavior. Understanding the pre-purchase decision, post-purchase dissonance. Whenever someone buys something expensive, they usually have an element of discomfort shortly thereafter. Same thing happens when someone hires an investment bank. We make sure that a week after the decision, a phone call is made to say, thank you, you're not going to regret this. This is the best thing you've ever done. And again, it's just comfort, but it's comfort worth giving. People and partners, I've said this many times, I invest in people, not assets. Milner, we would never have made that investment if we didn't have 2 key people who understood what we were getting into. Because a lump of steel or a pile of steel with a few lumps of coal terrified me. But the guys that we were working with, I trusted, believed in, and they're still running that plant today. The other thing is don't be afraid to take partners. My successes are largely driven off of the partners that I've chosen along the way, whether it's my now ex-wife and 3 amazing kids, or the opportunities I've had with Jim Davidson, who's my key partner at FirstEnergy, probably the best salesman in the country, or Murray Edwards, who's one of the great entrepreneurial minds in this country, or John Brusa, who's done all my tax work. When he started out, he was considered, right-wing lunatic for the positions he was taking, and today he's considered the godfather and the inventor of income trusts, and probably one of the strongest tax minds in the country. He and I became partners in a number of adventures in his 2nd or 3rd year in business. And the partners that I've chosen along the way are a key part of what I've enjoyed in terms of success. Last comment on business is plan and then execute. I think too often people get running a little too quickly in their business. They have a view that they know it all, the entrepreneurial mindset being blinkers, damn the torpedoes. Maybe there's an element of loving the risk, I don't know, but I don't see it that way. Take the extra time, and we spent an entire year planning FirstEnergy, and it looked like an overnight success, but we had done a lot of work to get that launched. And then the last comment is talking about processes with discipline. Some of you have heard me harp on this, but weekly meetings are critical. Weekly meetings are a big part of what keeps a team becoming a team, keeps a team familiar with where you've been and where you are. And if you don't know where you've been and where you are as a group, you've got no idea where you're going to be next week. And the way that we compete successfully is that if you're in Alberta and not at the partners meeting, you probably shouldn't come to work the next day. It's sacred. We have been absolutely religious about keeping the partners meetings going. And it used to be daily in the first month, then it became weekly, and now it's every 2 weeks. And we've got the discipline around that. We have meetings with our broader group of the junior partners who we're trying to grow in the off weeks, so that we have the key partners on every second week, the broader group, and again, partly to educate the junior partners as we go. So processes with discipline. It doesn't matter how cold out it is or how busy you are, we run our weekly meeting, and those are sacred. Guys follow in, phone in when they need to. Entrepreneurial Lessons Part 2, this is more about people. Life balance. I failed miserably in the early years of building my businesses at what I call life balance. I've been through cancer, I've been through the side effects of radiation, I've had a few other issues that tie into that. And if you don't value your health now, you certainly will at a later point in time. And so I encourage you to do what you can with your mental health, your physical health, to keep those as fresh and current as you always can. You know, the extra weight might be fun, the Dunkin' Donuts, you know, you gotta get control of that stuff earlier than later. I had 40 pounds to take off, I got rid of most of it. And again, health is a huge issue there. The other thing in terms of balance and priorities is I spent most of, from age 27, 28 to age 40, 42, working. Very few weekends. Holidays were every second year. Family went on holidays without me because I had to work. And as much as I can show a pretty good wallet for all that work, I can't show a lot of wealth in those years. So I encourage you to think a little bit about setting goals early on, and then following and setting your priorities around meeting your goals. If your goal is to make a lot of money, do what I did. But if you want to have more fun doing it and have some balance and a family, I lost my marriage, almost lost a couple of kids along the way in terms of a relationship, and I'm still playing catch up on that. You know, choose. We push our society to run a little too hard, I think. You know, you're in school, you're wanting to get out. Well, you're wanting to get out as quick as you can so that you can work a little bit of overtime. So you can call your spouse and say, I'll be late tonight. Then you can call and say to the kids, well, I'll be home a little later, but don't worry, daddy loves you or mommy loves you. And then you can work an all-nighter because that's what the client wants you to do. And then maybe you can put in a couple weekends so that you can say you got a little more done out of your in-basket. How fast do you want to get where? I just challenge you with that because that's your opportunity to decide. And at the end, you've got to figure out how you define success. And for me, success today is following my passion. Not just building a wallet, but following my passion. My passion are my children, my passion is my community, and my passion is still building businesses. But I've reprioritized the order in which those things happen. And that's a picture of me and 3 kids and a dog. And the dog is the world's greatest dog. And my comment here is very entrepreneurial though, and I'll read it. Whatever you can do or dream you can do, begin it. Boldness has genius, magic, and power in it. Begin it now, but study a little marketing and take the time to plan it. That's all I have for you. Happy to take any amount of time for Q&A, but I'm also going to mention right now, and I'm pretty proud to announce this, but Grant Isaac, I've been working with Doug Clark and Grant Isaac over the last year or two, looking at making a contribution of some size to the university, and what we've agreed today to do, to get this right, is develop a program around a $1 million donation that I'll make to the university around the Wilson Center for Entrepreneurial Studies. And so we're pretty pleased to... There are you. You're welcome. Thank you. Oh, sit down. Sit down. Thank you. I think it'll be a neat opportunity. Grant and I have got a bit of work to do to flesh that out, but I did challenge Grant a week ago and said, I've yet to see anything that really caught my fancy in terms of creativity. And his email started out, you're going to regret challenging me with creativity. And he did a fabulous job of tying something together. So we've got a bit of work to do, but we'll make that happen. The other thing I want to do is a special thank you to a professor who stayed with me through the course of time, Kay Nasser. He put up with late resumes or late assignments. He put up with all sorts of excuses, but continued to encourage me in terms of student politics. I have very few regrets in my life away from that, maybe missing an opportunity to prioritize my life. But Kay offered me an opportunity to work in Lebanon for a summer. We were doing pipeline construction. And I thought it was too far away, and I chose to stay in Saskatoon so I could water ski on the river. We water skied 3 times on this river. So Kay, I want to thank you for your inspired leadership as a professor who I saw doing entrepreneurial activities like Victory Homes, political arena, all of those things. And I saw what someone could do by juggling the opportunities that were in front of them. So I want to thank you.
I'm very proud of you. You can't imagine how much.
No, well, thank you, Kay.
Brett's going to take some questions. So.
From anybody but Doug Clark later. And Dad, I've already heard yours, so that's no more. I'm just kidding. My dad's here. I'm proud. Yes.
Living in Calgary, do you wear red or green on Stampede or Rough Rider games?
Do you think there's any doubt that I would wear green? Absolutely. I should say, in terms of my roots, I have an art collection that's based entirely on Saskatchewan. Might be the only one in existence, but there's 2 or 3 pieces. One I stole at an auction, and a couple others were gifts. But away from that, it is entirely Saskatchewan-based. Ernie Lindner, who was a great Saskatchewan, Kenderdine, Henderson, Mulcaster, Perhudoff. I mean, that whole genre is all that hangs in my house, my office, my cabin. That's all we do. So it's rider pride through and through. And before I get to that question, I also buy my cars from Vaughan Wyant. I buy my beers from Ron Waldman. Anyway, sorry, sir.
I've been invested in farmland for 35 years. It's probably the worst real estate investment I've made.
Hopefully you and I will do better starting now.
Why do you think it's going to be better? I'm running out of days.
Well, are you interested in selling? We could, before I give you an answer, let's sort that. I really do think it's partly based on this Fortress Alberta or Fortress Saskatchewan issue, where you had an artificially contrived market that prohibited outside ownership. So there wasn't true liquidity in the market. And whenever I've seen inefficient markets, I see opportunities. And that was a terribly inefficient market. That doesn't mean there's going to be an overnight lift. I also believe that technology will make a difference, whether it's biofuels or simply lowering input costs. Certainly fuel costs are going up, but we'll look at opportunities along those lines. So I just fundamentally believe that the human mind will find ways to do things better. And if you're taking a 20-year perspective, I think I'm going to get a triple, quadruple on the underlying value of the land. We're taking, of my portfolio, 2, 3, 4% of it to allocate to farmland in Saskatchewan. So not betting the farm, so to speak, but certainly interested in buying more.
So I shouldn't sell.
I wouldn't. Not to me. Yes, ma'am.
Being a civil engineer and now being in a different business altogether, do you miss your former education or have you used it?
I look at it as having built on it, but my education when I studied engineering was a combination of engineering raw number crunching. It was a combination of learning how to learn, brand new opportunities put in front of me. How do you adapt? What do you do? And it was also student politics. My ability to juggle and manage the number of things I tried to do. So that was all part of the education. So I don't look at it as having abandoned my engineering roots, but having built on them. And I've told my son if he wants to go into the merchant banking world beside me, which I hope he does, but again, that's his choice. But to do that, he's got to get 2 years of work experience following 2 degrees. And those 2 degrees, he's got a choice of engineering, law, commerce, or MBA, doesn't matter, one of the 2, not both, and liberal arts. Wide open, but he's got to learn how to learn and then spend a bit of time understanding, be it contracts or just elements of the real world. And then a couple years work experience, and then I'll take him and finish him off if he's interested. Because it'd be a neat opportunity to work with my son if he chooses, but who knows? It's up to him. It's a ways away.
And if he chooses not to, I'm sure there's lots of potential replacements.
Yeah, sure. I'm sure I'd get a little more respect if I went outside the family. Yes, sir.
We got a lot of things in common. I'm also from North Battleford, so we'll have to chat after. We also have some business colleagues in common too, related to Merck. One of the things I was going to ask you was, you know, you did very well in understanding the energy sector and the industry. You were able to spot opportunities where perhaps others did not. When you start looking at other industries and sectors that you're not so familiar with, and you put one of your points there about people and partners, how important was it for you, and how is it important for these people to understand an industry before they jump into it? And how important are people that understand an industry to be surrounded around you?
People are 100%. For me to get into a new business, I've got to be comfortable with the people. I don't have a lot of time, and I mean, someone heard me on the John Gormley show yesterday and phoned me from somewhere in Saskatchewan and said, I'm going to talk you into looking at a farm food business. I said, no, you're not. He said, oh, no, you've never dealt with someone as tenacious as me. And I said, well, go ahead, but I'm not. It's that simple. I don't know you at all, and I don't know that business, and I don't like that approach, so no, we're not likely to make it happen. But it still comes down to the people. For me, 9 times out of 10, if I get a gut feel that doesn't feel quite right, and I still make mistakes. You know, there's a deal that we're pregnant with right now that just blew up. It was an over-levered gas story, and the management team wouldn't share good information, but kept assuring us that everything was there. And my stomach just kept going, this isn't right, this isn't right, this isn't right, and now all of a sudden it's blowing up. And there's no liquidity, it's a private company, blah, blah, blah. And it just reinforces for me the need to stay with open and honest disclosure. Honesty and integrity are everything. And you know, not every business is going to go well. And if you run into a problem, you got to be able to work with the people you're partnered with to solve the problems. Bolt Supply House was as close to bankruptcy the year after I bought it as I've ever seen a business. You know, I had to subsidize working capital monthly to keep it alive. And now, you know, sales have tripled and boom, things are good. So, people. Yes, sir.
So if you're setting up a program in entrepreneurship, what would it look like?
Grant, help me.
That was actually going to be my question.
That's good.
Actually, Grant and I had this discussion last week or a couple of weeks ago, so you guys can comment.
Well, at a high level, it'll have to involve assessing people. Not just, I mean, many times the entrepreneurial studies, like when I mentioned I did these entrepreneurship case studies, all we focused on was the widgets or the business that they bought into, and then market share projections, cost projections, and there was very little about the people. And I look back on that and find that an extraordinarily deficient part of the education was understanding, you know, what it takes to be successful as an entrepreneur. And then, again, it still comes back to honesty and integrity, but people assessment. And then, as my pet passion is understanding marketing. I don't care if you're selling the little caps that go on a can of paint or a barrel of oil. You still have to understand marketing, and so I think I'd spend more time there. And then, to the extent it's possible, mentoring, letting students spend time with people in the real world. And you've got some phenomenal entrepreneurs in this city: the Remy family, the Dubé family. Vaughn Wyant is my hero. If any of you know the guy, he's a classic entrepreneur. Michael, are you in the room? Scared, are you? Okay. But the Wyant family, I mean, there's an entrepreneur extraordinaire, and Ron Waldman in the group of things he's involved with. A lot of phenomenal people in the city, and I don't know if they've been marched through the hollowed halls, but they should be. Kay Nasser, as an entrepreneur, should be all over these kids, as opposed to a professor and
I can keep learning from you.
And yeah, I'll come back once in a while too. But no, I think it'd be a pretty interesting opportunity. And Grant sent me an outline of what he had in mind, and it ties the concept of innovation to entrepreneurship, and I like where that goes. And away from that, we're only 6 hours into the idea, so it's still an entrepreneurial idea ready to be gestated. Okay, Doug, you can go now. As in, ask a question, not leave.
I'll say mine.
Oh,
I've
yeah.
been asking you questions for years.
We try.
There's a bit of a networking event out in the hallway out there, so there'll be an opportunity to ask some more questions, but I believe that Gord has a presentation.
Boy, do I now, I've got so much ammunition.
I get the microphone last.
You got the mic, so
Yeah.
I mean, but number one, you mentioned the music business. Well, I have an ex-partner of mine in the back, and he started HEL Music. And probably we used to manage bands, book bands, promote bands. So we separated along the way because musicians drove me insane, and my brother-in-law was one of them. But he probably may have something to do with the music part of things. As far as the National Energy Program, my brother and I, as partners, had $200,000 in those years into Gulf oil, Dome Petroleum, so which rapidly shrank, as he just mentioned, and it took us 10 years to pay off Mr. Trudeau's good idea. So I appreciate that we did that together. So there's a few other things that have come up that we'll have cocktails that I think are past sort of travel along. Except you got about 3 or 4 more zeros behind your end result than mine.
Still great return on investment.
This first thing, because we know you work out, this is from my daughter Michelle and Brett, who have the Lululemon store. So we know that rather than give you something you don't want or need, there's a College of Commerce.
Okay.
You never find because it's.
I'm pulling these back regularly.
Yeah, so that's the practical side.
I even wear some of that foofy Lululemon stuff with a little thumb thing. My daughters won't let me wear it over the thumb because you have to pull it. I mean, the mic's still on. I can't.
Now the amazing thing is when you were talking about your first business and the lawn mowing. So when you get into, my wife has written a book called Get a Bigger Wagon, and it's about growing up in small town Saskatchewan. This is an advertisement right now.
Yeah.
Call for about marketing. It was number 7 in the top 20 Saskatchewan books in 2005. It's number 8 this year. It's set only 1 point. But all it is about stories of things that I did. We sell material for 2 more books about growing up in small town Saskatchewan and the freedom you had and the people that helped you along the way. The whole community raised you, and why that affects who you are and why you become entrepreneurial. That being said, there is a story, and this is so appropriate, called No Contract. And it's about my first snow removal business, which coincidentally was the same big storm that they talk about in the 50s,
Right.
which just happened. I was in the snow removal business back then, so I'm a little older than you. Anyways, shoveled snow for hours, literally, me and my buddy, 4 or 5 hours for a little old lady. End of the day, get there, we're cooking. She comes to the door, and she has a bowl of apples. And gives us an apple, which we were hungry, which we appreciated, and our mouths started salivating. Then we sort of were standing around thinking, okay, something bigger. We saw something shiny, and we thought, oh God, it's a quarter. And then she went in and she got another one. We thought, God, 2 quarters each. We can go to the show, we can have a pop, we can have popcorn, we do all that. Unfortunately, it was a nickel.
Oh.
We got an apple and a nickel each. So that's this.
Did you put the snow back?
So, as our gift to you, from my wife and I, this is original painting from the book, and it's called No Contract, this painting, and it's done by Denise Klett. We have a publishing company, and my daughter writes children's books, and it's like a condo. And I used to have drugstores, so I could see that. Denise's art has been sold from all across Canada, United States, United Kingdom. This is a simplistic painting that takes the feel of the 50s. And her work is a portrait artist. If you drive up the Broadway Bridge, at the top of the Broadway Bridge, you see all those kids in there, that's Denise's painting. Also, your new casino in Calgary, the Deerfoot
Oh, yeah.
Casino, she was commissioned to do all the original artwork in there.
I was
About 80
just in there for the first
yeah.
time.
And so all the portraits and the landscapes, plus there was about 80 original paintings, plus an additional 400 prints
Oh.
in the hotel room. So this is called No Contract. Another Saskatchewan original artist for your collection, and you can see I'm pretty happy after my day's work. I'm going home, and it was funny, we just had the same storm. But I didn't go out and shovel. My good neighbor Ross, who's sitting at the back, has a John Deere tractor.
Aha, big green.
So,
Thanks very much, Gordon. Thank you.